Hello and welcome to the simulation! I am your host, Alan Sakia. Thank you so much for coming out. Global leaders with humanity's most thought-provoking questions onto the same stage. We hope to inspire people to build the future of civilization.
All right, so the term pro-aging trance, which I coined a long time ago now, is basically the psychological state in which one defends the concept of aging for completely irrational reasons. Because even if we have a small chance of actually succeeding with what we know today in hastening the defeat of our biggest problem, the thing that causes the most suffering in the world, we damn well ought to be going for that chance. About whether to live to 100 or 1,000, to be progressively taken away from me by my declining health.
Yeah.
Now that's a bleeding obvious thing, right?
That's a good way to put it.
This with the Fermi Paradox.
Of course, yeah. You can talk about the Fermi Paradox.
But the Fermi Paradox has plenty of answers that don't involve us being in simulation.
Like the Fermi filters.
Well,
Those are interesting.
right. So actually,
That means that there's potential filters that cause a civilization from being able to evolve to a point where they could then gain enough power to simulate, as in something like mutually assured destruction, nuking everyone, or potentially disease spreading, or asteroid collisions. There's plenty of those.
Right. So by far my favorite of the various traditional answers to the Fermi Paradox is the cloaking one, that essentially,
I haven't heard of this one.
Okay, so plenty of civilizations may get to the point where they fuck themselves up and
Oh my gosh,
blow
they
themselves.
cloak themselves?
But the fact is, also, there are various civilizations that get to the point of figuring out how not to blow themselves up,
Correct.
but they also
Get there.
recognize that some other civilizations may be not very peaceful and may be willing to go out and mess people up, right? And
Colonize with force.
for example, yeah, that's right. And the best way not to be colonized with force is not to be noticed. Now, of course, today we are aware that we are pumping out, radio wave stuff that is rather indicative of our intelligence, rather fast, of our having radio transmitters at least, yeah. At the moment, but it's not obvious that we would necessarily need to be doing that. We could quite possibly get to a situation where we could do everything we wanted to do down here and the radio waves were not getting out. And if that were true, we might feel that we were safer from other civilizations. So one perfectly good explanation for the Fermi Paradox is that there are plenty of civilizations out there that have survived perfectly well for a nice long time, but they don't want anyone to know that they exist.
So we use the power of something like our star to then cloak our planet.
Well, it might not even need much power. I don't know really what
You
that
don't
means.
think so?
Well,
To
I mean-
cloak? So an alien civilization looks through a telescope at our Earth, and rather than seeing little tiny ants that are humans roaming on the Earth, they see barren land. And
Oh, well, remember, that's not quite how it's done, right? I'm not talking about cloaking I'm not talking about cloaking at the visual spectrum. I'm talking about cloaking at the level of the radiation that the planet emits into space that
Okay.
goes arbitrarily far out.
Correct, but then what about vision-wise?
Right, so
Needs
you could
cloaking as
imagine
well.
that, some advanced civilization, if it got close enough, could have a look and,
Correct, they
see
can
that
just
there was
fly
stuff
by
going
and
on.
see if it, yeah,
That's right, but they'd have to take the trouble to fly by, right?
on land.
Right,
Correct, yeah.
and the question is which of
They could have
the
cloaking themselves
which
to
of the
land.
very large number of planets that exist might they bother to fly by? And the answer is the ones that are emitting radio waves.
Got it, yeah. That would be easiest.
Yeah.
It's easiest to discover other species through the electromagnetic spectrum, and then furthermore, then you can put your telescopes on.
And I mean, the extension of what I'm saying that you put forward is perfectly reasonable. We might end up cloaking a bit more, and doing the kind of thing you say. There's nothing particularly difficult about that. The community understood very well that aging is caused by the progressive accumulation of damage in the body, molecular and cellular changes that accumulate and progress throughout time, and eventually they get to a point where the body is not set up to tolerate them, and the overall physical and mental function that we have declines and eventually increases. But also, it's really, really hard to clean up our metabolism and slow down the rate at which it creates damage because our metabolism is such a mess. Instead, you can go in and periodically repair the damage preventatively, in other words, before there's so much damage that it has already caused pathology, And if you're repairing it reasonably well, then you can keep its overall level down below the threshold that's bad for you, even without having doing anything about the rate at which the damage is being created in the first place. If you can do reasonably comprehensive damage repair so that you can keep people healthy for maybe 20 or 30 years longer than they normally would be, then you've bought yourself all that time. You can apply those therapies to someone who's already, let's say, 60. In other words, they're not very far away from getting the pathologies of old age as a result of having too much damage. You can take them back in biological age, in other words, in the amount of damage that they're carrying, so that they won't have that same amount of damage again until they're, let's say, chronologically 90. Well, we've got these 7 different major categories of damage that I always talk about. These are very big categories. They sound a little bit like so big that they wouldn't be useful, but they are useful. So one is loss of cells, cells dying and not being automatically replaced by the division of other cells. So, that happens in a lot of different ways in a lot of different places in the body during aging, and it causes problems, of course. But you might think, well, so it's such a broad category, why is it even useful to define it? The answer is because the repair strategy for all such cases is broadly the same. It's stem cell therapy. That's what you do, you pre-program your cells in the lab so that when you inject them into the body, they know what to do. They know how to divide and transform themselves into replacements for the cells that the body is not replacing on its own. And, of course, different stem cell therapies for different tissues are different. But they're only different in their details. They have a huge amount in common. So once you've got stem cell therapy working really well for one condition in one tissue, the amount of work that's involved to get it to work for the second one and the third one is far less. That's why it's useful to have this classification, this taxonomy. From that purely economic point of view, aging is ridiculously expensive. I mean, 90% of our medical care goes on aging. And that's, of course, just the direct cost. That's not even counting the lost productivity of the kids of the elderly who are looking after their parents, or the fact that the elderly are no longer contributing wealth to society because they're not well enough to do so. All that kind of stuff, right? So if we fix all that, then the country is just going to be vastly more prosperous. What that fundamentally can be stated as is these therapies will pay for themselves at the national level ridiculously many times over, ridiculously rapidly. Overpopulation is not a function of how many people we have on the planet. It's a function of the difference between how many people we have on the planet and how many people we can have on the planet with an acceptable level of environmental impact. Measured whatever way you like, climate change, whatever, right? And people just kind of completely forget that second number is not a constant. It's not like the speed of light. It's not something that's a universal physical, immutable. It changes as a result of other technologies, hello, boys and girls. And these are technologies that are being developed in this town. Solar energy, artificial meat, desalination. These are the things that are going to increase the carrying capacity of the planet. And if you even slightly think about it, it is completely fucking obvious that these things are going to increase the carrying capacity of the planet far faster than the population of the planet could possibly increase, even if we completely eliminated all death from all causes now. And furthermore, purposes which are going to be with high probability available to everybody, the so-called ethical questions that might surround such applications of such a technology just disappear. Because really, to my mind, the only way that any new technology can be a bad idea to develop is if it fulfills 3 criteria. The technology has to be something that can be used by a small number of people to do a large amount of damage in a very small amount of time. If any one of those 3 things is not the case, then you basically don't have a problem. The society can control the misuse of the technology.
Is there an existential threat when the artificial intelligence leaders of the United States and the artificial intelligence leaders of China are attempting to maximize their economic success?
Oh, sure. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there's plenty of danger from the advances of artificial intelligence technology in general, whether you call it AGI or not.
Should we colonize Mars globally or nationally?
I don't give a damn. Mars is an unpleasant place. I mean, honestly, You know, I'm reminded of...
You don't want to prevent the light of consciousness from going extinct?
I'm all for that. I mean, I'm not...
So Mars isn't that bad of a place.
Hang on. I'm not the kind of existential risk type who says that, you know, it's absolutely pivotal that we should maintain the species at all costs in one way or another. I tend to be the kind of person who thinks that almost everybody dying is almost as bad as everybody dying. But nevertheless, I'm all for not everybody dying, and so absolutely it would be nice to have off-planet civilizations. But I wouldn't try Mars. I would build a much more controlled environment.
Would you go into space, like the International Space Station?
Space, yes, but yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, perhaps further away than the ISS.
You would make millions of habitable...
Oh, no, the point is you don't
space.
need millions in order to preserve the species. You only need a few, right? And
so you'd want to throw up 100,000 in there, and then just in case if something was to happen on the planet, then...
Yeah, I mean, there's 100... I'm sure we can find 100,000 people who are fucked up enough to want to live in space, right? So, listen, if we actually crack this, if we bring aging under proper control, it's not just that we're going to not have people with Alzheimer's disease. I mean, that's awfully wonderful, but the fact is, it's also going to help us to see that we have, as a species, the ability to address and to really succeed in addressing extremely hard problems.
Thank you all.